Now, what about outside of the children's hospitals? Most of the kids who are sick or injured actually don't present first to a children's hospital. They present to a non-children's hospital. And in 2006, the Institute of Medicine did a bunch of work culminating in some reports and a book called Growing Pains, focused on emergency care for kids. At the time, they found that only 6% of emergency departments in the US had all of the equipment that they would need to care for pediatric emergencies. So a very sobering number. They found that pediatric emergency care skills deteriorate very quickly without practice, but that practice was not really happening. There was a very limited training. In general, emergency preparedness plans do not include children, or did not in 2006. They found that all of these problems are exacerbated in rural areas. So this is kind of true across the board, but more challenging in rural areas. An emergency department or an EMS service that challenges to meet everyday pediatric care needs is obviously going to really struggle to meet the needs of kids in a disaster, right? If one child is really challenging to care for, then 10 kids coming in or 100 kids are going to be extremely challenging. After this report came out, there was a lot of activity to try to address some of these findings. The American Academy of Pediatrics and a lot of other organizations, I think ultimately it was more than 20 organizations that sort of signed on to these guidelines. There was a collaborative effort to develop guidelines for care of kids in the emergency department. And we'll go over what some of the guidelines look like on the next few pages. But the guidelines came out in 2009. In 2013, there was a project launch called the Peds Readiness Project, or Pediatric Readiness Project, and some of you in the room have actually participated in surveys of your hospital and emergency department over the course of the last few years. And they're basically, you can think about them as kind of an update of the work that was done leading up to that 2006 report, kind of a status report of how we're doing in terms of emergency care, both around the country and in individual states, regions, and down to the individual hospital. And these surveys focus on areas that the guidelines recommend, including administration and coordination of care, what's happening for the healthcare providers, specifically nurses and doctors, what are the processes for quality and performance improvement, what's in place for pediatric safety, and a couple other categories. So the most recent survey was in 2016, and in around the country, if we look and just take an average, on a scale of 0 to 100, the national average in terms of ED preparedness, and this is looking at every emergency department basically, or every emergency department that supplied data for the survey, which in Oregon is the vast majority. The national average is 70 out of 100. In Oregon, our preparedness is right on par with that at 69 out of 100. And in Region 1, our average preparedness is a little bit higher at 74 out of 100. Thinking about disasters a little bit more, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and you have a couple of references both on the flash drive and also in your white folders, put out a policy statement on the health of children in disasters with a lot of recommendations specific to disasters. A lot of them are really aimed at pediatricians, but there are a lot of implications in there for non-pediatricians, including EDs and hospitals. So that's another document that could potentially be really valuable. It's there together with the updated document for the guidelines of care, for care of kids in the ED, which was just updated last year. So what have we seen? Well, we have seen that we need the children's hospitals to be able to increase our capacity as much as possible in a disaster. And that's a critical piece of providing appropriate care to kids in a disaster. We've also seen that even as we do that, we know that the children's hospitals are not going to be able to provide all the care needed for kids in a disaster. And regardless of how much we beef up our capacity, especially as some of you who are further from the Portland area know, for weather, infrastructure, transport, other reasons, there are often times when even if you are able to get somebody to Portland, there may be a period of time that elapses before you can actually get them there. In addition to the children's hospitals needing to increase their capacity, we also need non-children's hospital to increase pediatric capabilities to the extent that they are able. And then at the same time, alluding to that final tier, we also need our partners outside of hospitals, including pediatricians and other pediatric providers that aren't hospital-based, to do whatever they can to try to alleviate some of this burden. When it comes to pediatric readiness in EDs, we're actually much better off than we are in 2006, which is really nice to hear. We've come a long way in terms of equipment and some of these other issues. We still definitely have room to go, and this is important not just obviously for disasters, but it's also important for the care of kids every day. And I just want to highlight this last point here. Everything you do to improve your everyday preparedness for kids is also going to help improve your readiness for pediatric disasters, right? So there are a lot of this is really specific to disasters today, but a lot of work that needs to be done is work that will not just help kids in a disaster, but it will help the next child who walks into your emergency department.